Get around, travelers. Welcome to Tavern Talks, the video podcast where game masters and TTRPG content creators around the world share their secrets, stories, and expertise on crafting the perfect TTRPGs and TTRPG sessions, of course. In this cozy virtual tavern, we'll be sitting down with experienced GMs to swap tales and trade tips and dive into the art of creating unforgettable TTRPG experiences, from world building to NPC crafting, session prep to improvisation. We're gonna cover it all. So grab a pint of your favorite virtual ale and pull up a chair and join the conversation in this episode. We will chat with Marc Hobbs. Cool. So Marc Hobbs, who is Marc Hobbs? I'm gonna just get into it. Who are you? Why you're here? What are you making right now? What's your TTRPG? Oh my god, who are you?
Who am I? Why am I here? How has this happened? Yeah, all good questions. Hi, I'm Marc Hobbs. I am a TTRPG creator. I live in the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And I work mainly on GMless games, which are just like the name implies, games that don't have a game master, dungeon master, whatever you like to call it. And I am the part of a design duo with my wife, Caroline. The two of us have a company called Let Then Three Game. That is our design umbrella. And we've made a couple of games that we worked on together. It's more, not so much that every game we make has both our names, but that we are collaborating and talking and helping each other as we go through the process of creating them and then turning them into products, which is a whole other thing from creating them mechanically. In my the rest of my life, I don't know. I have a job. I work for the state government, and that's take care of my son and play a lot of video games. That's other normal stuff
Hmm.
that I like.
So what sparked your interest in TTRPGs actually? That's what first question I would say. What sparked your interest in this hobby and why you started creating TTRPGs?
Yeah, so I got my start in high school playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, but then I kind of didn't do that for a while. When I was in college, I was busy doing other stuff, and then after college, I took a class, a post baccalaureate class that I was getting a certificate for teaching, and I met uh, the woman who would become my wife, Caroline, and she invited me to this meetup that was happening in Seattle where we lived, and it was a GMless games meetup, also called story games. I'll probably refer to them as story games, but it was this group of people meeting up to play these games. The games are all the kind of the core principle of this meetup was one shot games. Just you come in, you play, you leave. Like no continuity. It's all you're in, you're out. Single session and really newbie friendly, right? It was designed to you walk in the door, you sit down, somebody who knows kind of what they're doing is gonna open a game up and say, okay, this is how you play, and then we're gonna play it, and then that's it. No need to prep, no need to get anything ready. So I went to that meetup. I loved it. Um, Fast forward a little bit of time, Caroline and I are dating, and we're going to this meetup regularly together. And after you, I think, as anyone who has played RPGs for a little while, a few years, comes to realize, you play enough of them, you start to get that design itch, right? You're kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I make one of these. Like, I have a good idea. Could I? And even if you've played like in a campaign, for example, with a dungeon master for many years, you kind of start, you have lots of ideas of like what you want to do and what you want to see. I think it's just sort of a natural part of playing a game for a long time is you start to be creative and think of, oh, what would I do differently? How would I add to this? So that was where I kind of got my start was like, hey, I've played a bunch of these games. I wonder if I could make one. And eventually we did, you know?
So what specifically GMless or story-driven game actually, story-driven mechanics here? Why does it matter for you? What's what's of it?
Yeah, yeah. Why does it matter? Or do you want me to describe it a little bit first?
Okay, okay. It's all up to you. Another time, I want to see you.
Sure. So I think that the most important thing for viewers who aren't familiar with story games is These games are designed primarily around shared narrative control. So when you have what I'll call a traditional tabletop role playing game that has somebody in the driver's seat as the game master, and then the players are in a separate role, right? The game master has different powers and to affect the narrative of the story, like what happens in the story. The game master basically has most of the power in terms of telling everyone this is what the world looks like, this is what's in it, this is what all the people in it do. This is what happens when you take an action. This is the result of the action. All of that power, control of the story is given to this one person. And the players, they have control over just their person in the story, their character, right? So their power is limited only to what that character can do in the story and nothing else. They don't have control over anything else that happens, right? That's the structure that's traditional to Dungeons and Dragons being the most famous example, right? Story games were kind of a response to this, saying, what if we switched this power balance somehow, right? What if we changed the way that this worked so that instead of giving one player this huge amount of power and everyone else this very small amount of power, we tried to balance it in a different way. We remove that whole structure entirely. That's kind of the baseline. So um, we often describe, I think, my story game friends and I, that the table is round, right? We are all sort of sharing control and authority as we tell the story. That's probably the most central thing I can say about story games, because then from there's a million ways you can do that, right? There's lots of different structures you can use to accomplish that goal. Um, that, and I'll give you some examples from the games that I've made. But that's kind of the core of what is different about a story game compared to a more traditional dungeon mastered game.
Hmm.
That makes
So what I understand, all players contribute equally to the storytelling process in the story or GMless game. So a collaborative narrative where no single person has overarching the authority, like usual GM games, like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, and it's foster a sense of like a co-ownership in this creative process, right? And also like I think that in the shared narrative games, people often feel more invested because like they can directly influence the direction of the story, like the characters, world building process, like everything. So I definitely understand why people choose to play story related games or GMs games, let's say. But I wonder why you choose as it is your, like, a main focus
Yeah.
for lesson 3. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple reasons, and some of them are personal, and some of them are more, I don't know, egalitarian, I guess. So when I was in high school, I mentioned I played Dungeons and Dragons, and I really enjoyed that time, with my friends. I was 16, 15, whatever, right, as a teenager, and um, but I remember very distinctly because there were like 9 of us, I think, 8 or 9 of us. So most of the time it was, okay, we're in a fight with whatever monsters. It's your turn. Roll your dice. Okay, you missed. Your turn's over. See you in
Mhm.
20 minutes, right? You're just gonna sit here and do nothing while everybody else takes their turns. And I remember that it could get really boring because you're just basically not doing anything a lot of the time. Um, Now there are of course ways to mitigate that. There are ways to add more role playing, more less dice, more that, but that's also kind of what the structure of story games is pushing towards, right? Is saying, what if instead of the dungeon master talks, you know, most of the time, and then each player gets just one little slice of the time for it to be there. Oh, it's your spotlight, your turn. Okay, we're going over here now. And like you're just gonna be all alone. So that structure to me, it just it I remember it being sometimes very boring. And because you don't do anything for a long time, right? You're just kind of sitting there
Mhm.
waiting for your turn. When I have tried those games again as an adult, these sort of GM'd games, I'm trying to approach it now with this story game lens of like, I'm used to playing games because I played them for many years. I'm used to playing these games where I get to have a lot of authority and control over what happens. I get to put my creative energy in, and I don't, even when it's not my turn, I'm listening because I'm going to be able to build on what other people say in a meaningful way. And I guess really what it is that I can't go back. Like once I've tasted that sort of that amount of control, and it's really fun to be able to have that much contribution to a story. And now it's sort of like I feel like I don't want to let it go, right? Like I like having the ability to influence how things go. But the other thing I mentioned, uh, the other thing that I really like about these games is that they don't require any prior knowledge of how to play these kind of games. So
Mhm.
one of the things that you probably noticed too in dungeon mastered games that you've played, whether that's D&D or something else, right? Is there's a language, there's a lingo to it that you have to learn the terminology, you have to learn how the game is structured and how it works. You have to understand the numbers and the mechanics if you want to be successful, right? If you want to have a good time, if you wander in, maybe you can play it just somebody hands you the paper and you kind of try, but you're going to be pretty lost a lot of the time because you just don't know what's going on or how anything works. These games are designed primarily to be pick up and play
Oh yeah.
straight out of the book, right? Which means people who've never played them before can play them and can feel excited about telling a story. That is, to me, really, really meaningful and important. When I was in Seattle, and since I've lived where I do now, I've been part of various meetup groups that, like the one that I joined when I started, right? Uh, and the core part of these game groups is strangers welcome, like newbies welcome, right? And so, because we have this whole newbie focused thing, I get to play with huge variety of people and watch them sort of contribute to these stories in a way they didn't think that they could, right? That they were nervous. "Oh, I don't know. I've never played a game like this before." They can knock it out of the park because the games are set up in a way where I'm not like running, I'm not the GM. I'm just a player in the game like you. Even though I knew how it works, that doesn't give me any special knowledge. It's just I say the rules and then we all do it. So
Yeah, yeah. And also traditional games has like that there is a need for comfortable and like or let's say that experience enough to people to take the role of the GMs or the like lead players. So like GMs or story driven games, it really like eliminates the need of it. So it really makes it for again friendly, yeah.
yeah, that's another big benefit is the no prep element, right? For most GM games, unless you're grabbing something out of a prepackaged campaign, even then the GM still needs to read it beforehand. I mean, you can't really run it just literally open it and start. Like, you have to kind of know where it's going. So these games have this. You could just start playing them anytime, whenever, wherever. No need to get ready beforehand. Takes away that knowledge barrier.
Oh yes, and that's like no one has to shoulder the responsibility of preparing the game or maintaining the narrative momentum or distributing to the workload, like stuff like that. So that really makes sense. But like I have of course some questions like for example, well, how to say that? Like, okay, so without the GM to set the pace, like manage the rules or resolve any conflicts. So some players may feel those GMs or story-driven games lacks the structure necessary for a satisfying experience. So what do you think about this?
That's a really good point. I think that is a danger for sure that can happen. Um, and I think there's a lot of ways to address that concern and that problem. Um, some story games do have very clear conflict resolution mechanics. Like if your characters get into a fight, there is something you do to resolve it. Some of them have dice. I mean, some of them very much like, yeah, you have a stat of some kind or you do something with this dice or whatever, and then it decides. Other games don't have that. They range, I guess, all the way from oh, you still have stats, you still have dice, you still are rolling and stuff. There's just no one person who is sort of in charge of all of it, to there is nothing like that. There is no way to resolve a conflict except by talking it out, by discussing it together and saying, what's the best solution? So I think maybe one way to think about that is to talk about some of the games that I made, and that might give you an example of how that problem can be.
Yeah, let's get started.
Yeah. So this is one of the games that I wrote. This game is called Eden. Um, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit off of the back of the book because I think it describes it pretty well. Um, what kind of human will you be? Timid like a rabbit, loyal like a wolf, or maybe deadly like a serpent? Our favorite animals taught us everything we know. The nature of their lessons varies. The advice of the cooperative ants is very different from that of the thieving raccoons. Can we get along with our fellow humans with only the animals to guide us? The time has come to find out. So this game is about this fictional garden place that's sort of a paradise where these humans live. You're playing as the human characters. They're kind of innocent. They don't. There's no civilization or society, and also the animals talk. And the main mechanics of this game include making a map of this garden where you are, and then exploring it by playing role played scenes together with your fellow players, where basically what you're trying to accomplish is sort of seeing how the animals that are teaching your characters lessons, how those lessons affect the way you behave. So in this game, every human character has a favorite animal, right, that they hang out with all the time. And just like the text I read describes, if your favorite animal is the wolf pack, right? You're gonna do a lot of like wolf pack things where you're like loyalty and you're like the strongest is the leader, and we are always watching out for each other. Like we're gonna take care of the pack. Whereas if your favorite animal is, for example, like um, the mosquito, right? And you're gonna like be like, I just take whatever I want, and like I leech off of other people because that's how I get what I need, right? Is I don't make anything myself. I always just take it from other people if I need it. Or your favorite animal is the whale, right? You could have that. Sure, why not? Like you like to, just hang out by yourself and sort of just be alone and drift around and think about. So the way that the animal behaves influences how your character thinks, right? And behaves. And that's what the story is about exploring is how does that how do those things come into conflict when the wolf pack guy meets up with the whale guy and they're like, are they going to get along? Do they fight? Like what happens? In terms of the conflict resolution that you described before, right? How do you, well, if we're having a scene and I say I want to, jump on you and rawr, be a wolf and attack you, how do we do that? Basically, what we do is I say what my character is trying to do or does, right? I leap at you with my claws out and I try to slash you with my fingernails. And you get to say what the outcome is to your character.
Hmm.
And that's it. There's no dice, there's no stats. It's just narratively, if you as a player feel that, yeah, that totally works. You totally slash me up with your fingernails and it's horrible. Great. Then that's what happens. If you think, no, I think I'm too fast. I run away. Like I get out of the way. Okay. That's up to you too. But we just kind of talk it out. We negotiate it. Um, so that's how conflict works in that game. But I will give you a different example from a different game that I wrote. This game. This game is called Epitaph.
Okay.
So Epitaph is a role playing game. I'm going to read you the back again real fast. A role playing game about a person who has died. Their life is a story that starts at the end, then jumps freely backward and forward to their most important moments. As you create their story, you'll discover who this person was and what made them special.
Hmm.
This game is very, very different from Eden. Um, in that what this game is about is exploring the timeline of someone's life. So, um, at the beginning of the game, you spend some time coming up with the details about this person, that you're going to explore. There's a whole bunch of steps and mechanics, but the bottom line is you create this person, and you talk about how they died. What happened to them?
Yeah.
How old were they? Where were they? What happened? Why did they die? It's not a secret. It's not a mystery. They're dead. You figure out
Mhm.
that's the end of their timeline. That's the end of their story. Then the rest of the game is going back through the timeline wherever you want, jumping around and zooming in on individual moments of their life that you want to look at and you want to explore.
Mhm.
So in this game, there's really not conflict exactly. There is conflict, but there's not like between
Mm.
players conflict because we're all playing the same character basically.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So
you know,
there aren't any mechanics to actually to interact between the possible like outside though. So there aren't any conflict, and there aren't any that kind of a mechanic to avoid that. So there aren't any need of conflict, right?
more or less, yeah. There's one point at which the way that you interact with the timeline is you can choose from three different options. One of them is called a snapshot, where you just describe like a moment in time, like you're looking at a picture, right? And you're saying what's happening in this picture. There is a scene, which is again just like in Eden. You pick a character, I pick a character, we play, we role play, and in those scenes, you have the same kind of conflict resolution that I described in Eden. So I say what I'm going to try to do. You say what happens as a result to your character. Same idea as before. Um, and then there's one more kind of interaction in this game that's called a remembrance. And a remembrance is like a monologue where I pretend to be a character that knew the person who died. And I sort of talk to the camera, I guess, like to the audience, basically, of like, I just talk about my experiences with that person. So that's kind of the way you interact. So as you can see, only one of those really has any chance that you would disagree with another player.
Mhm.
But I think that one thing to kind of keep in mind, and now that I'm thinking about it, is in a dungeon mastered game, really one of the central conflicts is, does my character's attempt at action succeed? Right?
I know.
I want my character to stab the orc with his sword. Okay? Like, does it succeed or not? Um, in in many games, the answer to that question is, well, we use dice. We roll the dice, so we do the math, and the math tells us whether it succeeds or not, right? And that's kind of a simulation, right? We're saying, if I imagine the following things are true, right? You're this strong, and it's this kind of sword, and the orc has this armor, and it's a Thursday, and it's windy, right? Like all these details. That then I say roll dice and say, okay, mechanically, here's the numbers, boom, 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 and it's all around the open. But that's kind of the simulation method, all the way over to kind of what I'm describing is this very narrative based method where it's not up to, we're not trying to simulate anything. We're trying to say, what is the most narratively satisfying? Like, what feels like it's right for the story?
Oh, okay. So I got a question in my mind about it. So what about for example, in this kind of a game, there should be like a players on like varying skill levels in terms of creativity or engagement, like might struggle to you to contribute equally, so which could lead to uneven storytelling. And so, are there any tools to ensure all players feel empowered or like to shape the narrative, or like how does your game handle like different levels of creativity or involvement?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think it's a really insightful question. Um, and I think that is a struggle sometimes. I completely agree. You can have what I think is the mark of a really strong story game, and I'm not trying to be too proud of my own work here. I think I've played a lot of story game types.
You should be, and you can say so.
I mean, I do think that what I made is good, but I think there's room for it to get better. But in a lot of, one of the things I use to determine whether a story game is good, in my opinion, um, is how, if you can pick it up and play it with people who are inexperienced, maybe struggle a little bit, right, with that sort of, because they're shy or they're awkward or they don't know quite what they're doing, or the reverse problem, they're way too eager and they're like overpowering the conversation, and they
Mm.
always want to make it their ideas, right? um if the game can still be fun even with those players in it, then that is an indication of a really strong design. because the design structure is because you don't have a, let me put it a different way. Whose job is that in a dungeon master game to control the table? It's the dungeon master, right? So if you get a dungeon master who does not have those social skills to be able to keep everybody together and moving forward, yeah, it can be a disaster, right? Um, when you distribute that power amongst all the players, it reduces some of um, that burden. Like the dungeon master being unable to control it, kind of just the whole game is off the rails. But in this, it kind of brings everybody back to a more egalitarian. So everybody needs to contribute. But if one person is flagging, other people can step up to kind of help overcome that, right? There's no way as a player in a dungeon master game that I can somehow compensate for the dungeon master not knowing what they're doing, or you know what I mean? Like I have no authority to do that. But in these games, I do have more authority to make that happen. So it relies on everybody contributing, is what I'm trying to say. And one of the ways that I address that in this game, I think I think this is a more recent one that I made. This one was my first like major design that I did. This one is newer. So I think I did it more successfully in this one. The amount of creative effort that you need to put in to contribute on your turn. First off, we have individual turns, right? It's not just a free for all. You know, everybody takes their turn, and when it's your turn, it's your turn, right? No one else is allowed to give you ideas or tell you like, oh, you should do this thing or whatever. Like, no, no, no. You need space, right? You need to think.
No meta games. Okay.
Right. Like if you need help, you can ask for it, but people shouldn't just be pushing suggestions on you, right? They should not be telling you until you ask them to help me. I don't know what to do. Help me out. Then they can help you. But give them space to think, right? People need a little time. You're coming up with something new. Um, this game has, like I mentioned, those three things you can do: this snapshot, scene, remembrance, and those are in order of creative difficulty, right? So a snapshot is actually very simple because all you're really doing is describing one moment in time. So if you have, and the game walks you through steps of like answer this question and think about this, and boom, there you go. It's much um, it's a very small lift, right? It's not very hard to come up with something for that compared to say a scene where now you have to think of, okay, who's here, what's happening, where are we, and I have to play a character, but other people are helping you by playing characters, all the way down to this remembrance, which is like it's just you. It's solo, right? It's a monologue to the audience. So it's all you, baby. If you don't want to do that, you don't have to. Like you never have to. You can do snapshots the whole game and still have a good time. And snapshots are the easiest lift to do. I think that it, if and when I want to make like a second edition of this game, which is like in the back of my mind to do someday, I think that I would like to add um, more support to help the players create effective contributions to the game, right, on their turn. Because a lot of games do that by telling you it's not like they say, okay, it's your turn, go. They say, okay, it's your turn. Here are some specific things you can do. Here's some questions to help you. Here's some structure to kind of get you to put something into the story that's going to help move the story forwards.
Mm-hmm. So there's a question in my mind again. So like the premise of okay, so in Epitaph you said that you're exploring a single life. Okay, so does it makes some sort of let's say that limits replayability, especially if the same group plays it multiple times. So are there any mechanics to it, like introduce variety, or other than story like players telling the stories, such as like randomized traits or I don't know specific contacts or optional play modes? I don't know. I'm just asking it. Or isn't not even a problem because people are creating the stories or something?
It's that second one. You make a different person every time you play.
Oh,
It's literally a new person. It's not the same person. Sorry if that wasn't clear. It's not
mm.
one pre-made person. It's
So
we
okay.
make a person. Yeah, we make a
So
person.
okay.
So
That's endless. possibilities. Okay.
Yeah, let me I'm gonna read you the rest of the back. I only read the first bit, but there's a tiny bit more. Um, as you create this story, you'll discover who this person was and what made them special. Explore the life of a devoted grandmother whose dream of owning her own restaurant came true. A bold captain who married her arch rival and became the most infamous pirate in the Viridian Isles. A sensitive soldier in the trenches who didn't make it home alive. An arrogant wizard who strove to unlock ancient secrets and found more than he bargained for.
Mm.
Or anyone else you can imagine.
Oh yeah,
So
God.
you make the person at the beginning together. There is no pre-made, and this game doesn't have any like tables to roll on or selecty thingies like that. Um, for making the character, it's all just asking questions together and answering. Some games do. Some story games have more structure like that, where you're maybe rolling dice to randomly create stuff.
Mm-hmm. So my another question is like, okay, so we're exploring someone's life in Epitaph,
Yeah,
especially through like a it looks like a tragedy or bittersweet themes involved. So it also could lead to like emotionally charged moments. So these moments may like, do you have any? Does this game actually include any safety tools like I don't know lines and veils or any mechanism to players to pause it or adjust the narrative when discomfort arises between themselves? Like I'm not talking about just the situation where the people's telling it I don't like this. I'm just trying to find any mechanic that can help that.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, again, another great question. This game includes instructions about what I consider what I found to be the most effective safety tool, which is called the X card. Um, and I'm gonna mess up this person's name, but I'm gonna tell you who mentioned it because it talks about where is it in here? Idiots.
Oh, it's Jones Trostamopoulos, something like that.
Yeah,
G.
John Stavropoulos. That's it. John Stavropoulos. The X card. Thank you. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about already. So, just again for your viewers, very briefly, the X card is essentially a card with an X on it. Doesn't have to literally be a physical card. You can also make an X with your hands, or just say X. Right? You don't have to make anything. Um, but the premise is that we pause the game, we figure out what it is that is upsetting you about what we just did. Doesn't matter what it is, doesn't have to be anything particular, right? Like maybe it's something that a lot of people would be upset about, like torture. Okay. Like you're like, oh, whoa, I don't want to, you know, sure. A lot of people might be upset by that. But maybe it's like, I'm going to name this character Shelby. And you're like, ooh, my ex's name is Shelby. Can we not? I want to X Shelby. Okay, great. It does not matter why it's making you upset, why it's pulling you out of the fiction. The point is that it's taking you away from the fun. Now you're in your head, you're not participating because something's upsetting you. And we just take it out of the game. And that's it. That's the mechanic that I've found is really most effective in the games that I've played in. Um, and I think that um, it's also largely a table decision, right? Uh, that when you are at a table with people that you know really well,
Yeah.
that kind of has a different space than if you're playing with strangers. And again, I think without getting too far into it, some games include more stuff, right? Some story games have it baked in that you have like these slow down, speed up mechanics, all this stuff. I find it personally, I feel like it's too much of a mental load to try to keep all that safety tools in your head
Mhm.
while you're also trying to learn how to play the game and play it. I feel like having one thing that's very straightforward and simple, touch the card. That's all you got to do. And then the game pauses, everything freezes, we figure it out. Um, that I feel is like simple enough that you can keep it in your head while you're also then contributing creatively. But
Mhm.
that's just me. I know other players really like having those other structures and mechanics. And it, I think it's much more of a personal and a table decision than it is the game itself. Like all these games, uh, the safety mechanics that essentially function the same way when you're playing them. One other thing I will point out, I think that you were kind of getting at is that this game feels like it would be tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that too when I was making it, when I first was designing it. I was like, is this always going to be sad? Is this a sad game? But the truth is that it's actually not. It's actually very poignant and can be very funny, even at times. Because when you start the game, the first thing you talk about is death, right? The first thing you talk character dying. But then you pretty much never talk about it again once you actually get into the timeline. Because you're not, the death is the end of the story, but you're not interested in the end of the story. You're going back, right? You're seeing several times in their life, right? So in most games I've played, we never talk about the death again. Like it almost never
Mm-hmm.
comes up. The only time it might is if it was like really, uh, like some kind of, it's just somehow it was like a culmination of something else happening. But for the most part, like it's not really that at all. It's just that's the end, and then we move on from there. And um, one of the other central mechanics of this game, when you're making this person, is you describe a goal that they had during their
Mm-hmm.
life. And you do this together, collaboratively, but you're setting up a goal that they had, something that they maybe wanted a lot of things, but you're picking one thing to focus on, right? What is this one thing that they really wanted? Um, and then you say whether they did it or not. Straight up,
Mm-hmm.
yes or no. Did they do it during their life? You decide that at the beginning. So that way you can play with foreshadowing, you can play with all these different elements of, well, okay, we know that they got their goal. When did they get it? Like when in their life did they achieve it? And what happens after that, right? Or not. So that helps us kind of set the tone of like, oh, find true love, right? Was their goal. And if they never did it and you all decide together, no, they never found true love, well, that's probably kind of a sadder story than if you say they did. So it's kind
So,
of you calibrate the tone together.
mm-hmm, makes sense, makes sense. So, since we just got 20 minutes more, I want to ask you about your other games and if you want to add any specific mechanics or something that you like want to like emphasis, you can just add it as well. Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I should probably talk about my wife's games a little bit too,
Especially Downfall.
especially Downfall. Yes, I actually have it right here. Boom. Downfall. So, um, in brief, Downfall is a game about creating a society based around a flaw being like a character trait, like greed is a classic example, or, um, fear or whatever, right? Cowardice. And then creating a society that's based on this flaw, and you use that flaw to make traditions. These are things that society does, customs that society has. These traditions have symbols associated with them, which can be like a picture, a literal symbol, or like an act you do or something. For example, like a ring is a symbol of marriage, right? That's like somebody's married if you see the ring. Um, you take these traditions and symbols and then you make characters. And you make a character who is called Hero. The hero is trying to sort of push back on the flaw, trying to save the society from itself by pushing back on this flaw as it kind of increases. You have the Fallen. The Fallen is someone who is totally focused on the flaw. Like they will sacrifice everything if it means getting that flaw more, right? If greed is the flaw, they are super greedy. They are like way into greed. They are all about greed. Um, or if it's if courtesy is the flaw, right? Politeness. You could pick whatever you want, but if that's the flaw, they're so into politeness. They are so polite, like to a fault, right? And then you have the pillar. And the pillar is just like a normal person, like status quo, like everything's fine. What's the problem? I don't understand why you're so upset, right? What's bothering you, hero? Like everything's cool. This is okay. Um, those three characters have relationships and stuff. I don't have to get all the details, but as you play through the story, um, the flaw continues to get worse and worse and sort of corrupts the society by turning the traditions more and more extreme as time goes
Mhm.
on, till eventually the hero can no longer push back and the society collapses, right? And whatever that looks like depends on the circumstances of your game, but that's the big picture of this game works, and thus the downfall, right?
Mm-hmm. So my first question is actually like, why the word building process in this game is like a major draw, and it's like pretty awesome. So is it overshadowing the role playing segments in any kind of a game, or I didn't play it? That's why I'm asking. I want to play it. Is it overshadowing the role playing section of the story game, or just
Is what overshadowing it?
like the world building process of the game? Like it should took some time. So how does a game balance the time and depth of world building with the role playing of characters and events? Or
You got all the good questions. I gotta say, that's a really good question. Um, the answer is that building the world is part of playing the game. Uh, it is really fun and it is really satisfying. You're right. You basically have two phases to this game. Eden has a similar thing in that in Eden, like I said, you're building
building it
the
hard?
map, the garden first. That's like chapter one or section one of the game. And then section two is all the role playing. Downfall is similar in that you have section one is building this society together. And you're
Mm-hmm.
not playing characters, you're playing yourself, basically, your narrators, right? You're just authors telling, crafting the story, crafting the world, right? Setting up the pieces. You could almost picture it like dominoes, right? If you're setting up dominoes that you're going to knock down, right? And so the first part is getting them all just right, and you're like, what if it went here and then it did this thing, and like, oh, you know, getting it all just set up how you want. And then the second half is the role playing half, and that's when we do
Mm-hmm.
inhabit these characters and we get to go inside this thing we just made and watch the giant dominoes now collapse on our characters' heads that we set up in the first half. So there's a lot of satisfaction to this building the world. And like you mentioned earlier, I think to bring it back to something you said at the beginning, players feel a much stronger sense of ownership and satisfaction because they helped make this world together.
Mhm.
And so it's not like I walked into the room and said, here is this world, this society I made up. Here's all the details about it. I'm just going to tell them to you. Now let's play a game. That's a different style. That's a different structure, right? And that ownership of like, no, we made this together, that is very satisfying to play. And it feels fun to be able to do that together.
Mhm. So I actually was looking to your web page, lessontree.com, with them folks. So Fedora Noir, Fedora Noir, it's
Fedora Noir.
a nice thing. And I just read the description, a game about a detective and their hat. In Fedora Noir, you create the story of a cold private investigator in the style of a film noir. That's a pretty nice idea. I really like it. I would like to play really. So yeah, that's awesome. So can you just describe it a bit? Is it your game or your wife's game?
My wife's game. Yeah, my wife designed this game. A friend of ours named Morgan Stinson, his name is like also on the cover there. Um,
Mhm.
kind of created the original version of this game, and then after a few years, he sort of lost steam with it. And then Caroline was like, "I really love this game. Can we finish working on it together and develop it?" So they collaborated, and Caroline helped sort of turn it into what it is now. Um, so Fedora Noir is very different from the other games I described, not because it's still GMless, but
Mhm.
it is trying to accomplish a genre, specific genre of film noir, basically. And so what you do in this game, it's on tarot-sized cards. Do I have a copy handy? Don't see one in here. I would have to go to the other room to get it, but mm, I don't have one on hand. Unfortunately, it's the one I didn't grab. Basically, you have cards, and the cards are walking you through what to do. So when you play this game, you open up the box of cards. They're in order, right? You set them up, and the instruction cards tell you how to set up all the things, and then just
Mhm.
play through it. And it's great. I've played it at conventions, story game conventions, many times. It plays really well in like 2 hours, start to finish. Like open the box to game over. Mm, perfect for a very quick pick up and play. So basically, the structure is like this. You create together. You select from a setting. There's like settings pre-built in to the game. Classic. The two most classic ones are like the 1940s big city. It's rainy and gritty and whatever kind of film noir classic. And then like Blade Runner cyberpunk sort of future, right? Like sort. neon and cool motorcycles and whatever, right? Um, but there's a bunch of other ones that are in there too, different variations on that. And then you pick characters, right? And you sort of build these characters together, and there are four. So you have the detective, who is this kind of, however you want to play them, but generally they're kind of gritty, hard boiled. They've, jaded, seen some things, down on their luck, maybe make bad choices, self destructive, you might say. You have the flame, who is a romantic interest for the detective. You have the partner, who's like a professional interest for the detective, right? Somebody they work with and then somebody they're romantically excited about in some way. And then you have the hat. And the hat is also the detective, but the hat is the detective's thoughts and inner monologue, right? So the players playing the hat and the detective are playing the same character, but two different parts of it. The players doing the detective is all the actions that the detective takes, what they say and what they do. The hat is what's happening inside their head. S- y- Much like a film noir.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If you've watched these films, then you kind of have a sense of like, there's a lot of monologues to the audience of like, she walked in the room, she was a tall drink of water, like whatever else, that kind of thing, right? Um, that's the hat is doing all that stuff. And then the detective can do what the hat thinks they should do or not. It's up to them, right? From there, the game is structured around chapters that walk you through basically the most overarching general plot of a film noir
Mhm.
that we could come up with, right? Um, all the bits, right? But there's decisions to make. Each chapter has like three quotes that are sort of like, what direction is this part going in? And each time you play, you pick one. Um, it's different players doing. There's more mechanics than I'm describing. Basically, you kind of go through the chapters and it tells a noir story. And then you get to the end and it's kind of like, okay, that's the epilogue, like what happened to everybody, and that's it. And the story's over. It's
Mhm.
not one thing I want to emphasize is that it's not a mystery game. Like there is a mystery, right? The detective is trying to solve a case, but solving the case is not really the point. It's about telling the story of these characters and of the detective, right? And if they solve the case or not, which usually they don't, or even if they do, it's usually not satisfying because it's like,
Oh,
oh, nobody gets what they wanted, right? Or whatever, because it's noir. That's what happens in noir.
that I really like about in your, of course, in your HIO, it's the no boundaries. The boundaries is like it is really a nice feeling in it because it's about like a retail hell. Like I'm just gonna read it. No Boundaries is a story game about dysfunctional relationships in retail hell. You play as a low-level employees of a failing bookstore called Boundaries Books and Cafe. That's perfect. When first read it, I just download it, and I'm gonna play it, of course. And it really like it creates the sense of the what most people in the U.S. and in the world around the world are living right now. Like no boundaries. That's it.
Mm,
hmm So, would you like to emphasize on its mechanics or something, or kind of anything about it? To like
sure.
talk about it? hmm
I would love to. Yeah. It's honestly, I really think No Boundaries is one of the best things I ever made. I made No Boundaries in like 2 weeks because there was like a contest that I don't know if it's still running, but it used to exist where you get a bunch of random words basically and you try to make a game out of them. And this is what I came up with for that particular year. It's in the game. It's like at the very end, there's a little text about it, but whatever. Um, I worked at a bookstore when I was in college and making coffee and in a bookstore and a cafe in it. I won't say the name of it, but you can probably figure out what it might be if you're an American watching this. And um, I will say that yeah, so I've had that sort of retail hell experience, and that fed into this a lot. Basically, I think what I really like about this game is it does a couple of things that are fun for foreshadowing and playing with.
But
Um, the story takes place over 1 year, that the bookstore is going to shut down after a year. So as characters, as players, your characters don't know that, but you do. And so that lets you set up really funny sort of payoffs as you go forward. Like, oh man, I'm just gonna next year it's all going to be different, right? And you're like, well, there's next year, but my character doesn't know that, so I can make some funny statements about it. Another thing that's great about it is we set up dysfunctional relationships with each other, right? So like everybody has a dysfunctional relationship with somebody next to them, whether that's like we had a fist fight in the back room at the office, or we're secretly hooking up and nobody knows, or whatever. Just not stuff you should be doing with your coworkers, and here we are. Um, and then the last part I really enjoy about it is corporate. So it's played in like 4 seasons, right? Every 3 months. The head corporate office tries some crazy gamble to save the company, right? Whether that's, you know, partnering with a brand that doesn't make any sense, right? Um, like it's like our bookstore now, our cafe now sells Cheetos, right?
Oh yeah.
You know,
Or we're you're a pharmacy, but we're going to sell drugs and cigarettes.
Yeah, we sell coffee. Yeah, we sell coffee and pastries and over the counter prescription medications, right? And it's like, okay, yeah, great idea. I'm sure that'll be great. Or, you get to make it up yourself. There's a bunch in there to suggest it, but you could do whatever you want. Another one I really like is, you just like sort of one of the player characters randomly selected gets promoted to manager and is now everyone else's boss. And right, like all of a sudden, right? Like, oh no, all of my relationships are now ruined because now I'm boss of all these people. It, I wish that I could say that it wasn't true.
It's my boss. Oh my god, what's
You
happening right?
exactly, exactly. So you could kind of see it lends itself towards very sort of silly stories, which is the kind of the point. But there's some you know depth in there because it like speaks to something that a lot of us have experienced of dealing with bad jobs and like big corporate entities that don't care about us that
Oh
we
yeah.
have to be part of because this is the system we exist in. So, and it's free. No boundaries, it's free. Pick it.
Guys, I'm gonna put all the links down below. Buy something and get this one free, but buy something first. And this is it just free? Name your own price. So
Name your price. If you
if you're
feel it.
gonna at least give some bucks, because it's some creative process, guys. You have to pay for it. Okay, so my question is, what is your secret sauce? What is your tips and tricks to create the perfect TTRPG? And it's your last 5 minutes. So,
Entire
and also if you want to add something, you can add it as well.
I would love to tell you just a little bit about design. I think, of course, we could talk for another hour about design
Mhm.
process. So, just in very, very brief, um, when I go to design something, I've got several projects that I'm working on now, and various like I go a little while, and then I forget about it for 6 months, and I go a little more, and I come back and I do something else. Like anybody working on creative things, it's like, I'm busy and tired and whatever. But
Mhm.
um, I think the first step to thinking about this is to think about, is there already a game that does this thing that I want to do? Like if I have an idea for how a game, what I'm interested in, I kind of look around and I'm like, is there already a game that does this? Because if there is, do I have something that I want to say about this topic that's new? Or is there already something somebody made that like does the thing I want? And then if
The-
there is, well, okay, great, I'll just play that. Like that's mission accomplished. Um, when I'm actually designing something, I've gotten, I'd like to think I've gotten better over the years at it, but um, I try to really consider um, sort of first principles of like what is this game about, and like
you-
what kind of stories do I want to tell. So when I start designing something, I'm like, what are some examples of the types of stories that I might want to tell, and then I try to think about the structure of the game as how can I make it so that the players I set up steps for the players to follow that when they do the steps, they will tell this kind of story, right? That what are, you got to take about, which requires like thinking about the kind of story you want to tell and then breaking it into its like pieces and saying, okay, how do I get this piece to exist? Can I make
Mhm.
people create it and then put it in the right spot? It's like writing instructions for how to create a jigsaw puzzle. And you're like, well, okay, step one, you have to look at get a picture and then cut out the pieces and then put, it's like, there's a lot to it. But I think having a foundation of what are my core pieces that make this game what it is or make it unique. and then not getting deviated from those, like trying to um that's important. Another thing that's really important is having lots and lots of feedback, right? Like having other people read it, other people look at it,
That stuff like
play
that.
testing. Yeah, absolutely. Play testing is essential, right? And iterative play testing where you say, okay, this is version 1.6. We play it. I take it back to the table. I look at everything. I take notes, all the thing. Okay, 1.7. I play it until I want to get to the point where I'm playing it and I'm not changing anything after I play it.
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, that worked. There's nothing really changed now. That's the place I want to get to. But that requires a lot of testing, right? Test over and over until you reach that point. So that's another thing I would say is, just really try to like have lots of playtests, lots of people, different people, not just the same people always playing it, but try to get new people to try it or at least read it, and say, what questions do you have while you read this? Because that's
Mhm.
what's going to get you a product that people can pick up and play straight out of the box, straight out of the book without needing any prep ahead of time. That's the goal.
Perfect. And hopefully there will be another video about game creation then. And we can maybe share it later. So thank you so much being here and helping me out in this project. And also I want to help you out because people in this hobby, we need to support each other and create our best. And also please buy and donate because I'm not just saying this because like any sake. I'm just saying it because people need more to create more. That's the basic equation. So thank you all, and thank you, Mark, for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Have a great day, guys.